This meeting is now being recorded.
And sustainable land use in British Columbia. And we also provide funding grants to nonprofits working really to improve communities in BC through responsible and informed land use, conservation and real estate practices. And one of our funding priority areas is local and sustainable food systems. So this really started about a year ago when we formed a working group around sustainable food systems. And this consisted of various organizations, including Farm Folk, City Folk, Land City, the BC Food Systems Network, CR Fair, Queensland Polytechnic University. And we began meeting to really
yes.
Really hard
to share ideas and thoughts around what are some of the regional priorities.
All guests have been muted.
And local sustainable food system. And so throughout those different meetings that we had as a working group, we came forward with this idea to have some regional dialogue around the progress of BC, because we wanted really to understand better three things. How do people envision food systems in their region? And what capacity and resources currently exist? You know, not just where we are in Metro Vancouver, but in different regions of British Columbia. And then we wanted to try to prioritize some recommendations and actions to help us make better decisions, but also help share some of our findings with others of like-minded individuals. So hopefully, we do have a sold-out webinar today, and we're really hoping that you can join us in this discussion. Basically, the format will be, we're going to be holding two presentations by guest speakers, and they'll be about 15 to 20 minutes each. And then the last 20 minutes, we will be having a Q&A session. And this will be a chance for webinar participants to ask questions to our panel. And, hopefully we can have more of a discussion on sustainable food systems. We will be asking, if you do have a question, you can type it in. We've muted the line so that it'll just be through typing in. And for anybody on Twitter, we encourage you also, you can write us a tweet, and we will try to respond to as many as we can. So you can tweet at REFBC, that's Real Estate Foundation, BC. And we also encourage you to use that Twitter hashtag of BC Food, hashtag BC Food. And then we'll, as I said, close up with the last about 20 minutes on some questions that people might have. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce our panel that we have here today. We'll start with Dr. Cornelia Sussmann, who's a sustainability researcher, a planner, and a consultant who helped us run these regional dialogues and also write up the report. And Cornelia also works at the Institute for Sustainable Food Systems at Queensland Polytechnic University. And she will also be joined by Caitriona, Feeney, who is also an urban planner and works at KPU and has been another consultant that has helped us both put on the 6 dialogues that we ran and did probably the lion's share of writing up the report for that is on our website. So I'm just going to hand it over to Cornelia. Welcome today, and begin.
Thank you, David. Once again, Caitriona Feeney. I met many of you guys at the dialogues that we did in November. We will be going over some of the final findings that we presented in a report. Look forward to hearing some of your questions at the end of it. Like David said, our main goals for the dialogues were to look at the vision, priorities, and actions throughout the province, particularly the regional priorities, and then compare and contrast throughout the province. The project was conceptualized by the Sustainable Food Systems Working Group as a way to identify ways to coordinate efforts, link organizations and community leaders, identify the similarities and differences and opportunities, and establish the main priorities that need to be tackled throughout each region and the province. We aligned, in order to separate the province into 6 regions, we aligned with the former ALL panel region. Throughout the province, there are 28 regional districts, 159 municipalities. So we understood that we wouldn't be able to reach everyone, but we tried to locate our dialogues in central areas throughout the province.
And the Real Estate Foundation put on this dialogue because they want to, their funders, and they fund large projects, like large community engaged workshops.
Hello? Hello? All I can hear is someone typing. Hello?
We're having trouble hearing. For each dialogue, we aim to have about 15 participants. Some areas we had more, around 20, and other areas about 12 or 13. We decided to, in order to try to capture all the main food system actors in each region, we invited people from 8 categories listed in the slide. And we were quite successful in getting members from each area out, especially producers. For the dialogues, we split up the 3-hour session into 3 parts. The first one was to look at what is a sustainable local food system and get participants to define what that means for the region and for the province as a whole. Then we looked at what are the main priorities for your region, looking at opportunities and challenges. Then we asked each participant to stand up and vote on the top 3 or 4, just so that we had the opportunity to narrow it down and try to build some actions for each of those challenges. We had a limited amount of time, but we tried to tackle as many priorities as possible. For the first part, we looked at defining what a sustainable local food system was. And throughout the region, the three things we heard most, that it should be economically viable, it should be appropriate for the region's ecosystem, and it should be appropriate for the region's people. And by that, we were meaning culturally appropriate, affordable, and accessible. I will now turn it over to Cornelia to take a look at what the findings were for the priorities and actions.
Great, I'm Cornelia. Welcome, everybody. From the dialogues, Caitriona and I were able to identify 4 province-wide priorities. Sorry, everybody, just a moment. Slides back. Megan, can you help with that? Great. So one of the first priorities was to increase knowledge about sustainable and local food systems among the general public and policymakers. At all of the dialogue, we heard a concern that the general public, or many members of the general public, are somewhat disconnected from the foods that they eat. They have limited knowledge of where their food is grown, where it's coming from, what it costs to produce food, and also that there's limited awareness of the potential benefits, ecological, social, and economic, that local and sustainable food systems could bring. Another priority area for action was expansion of local infrastructure for processing, storage, and distribution. We heard that local producers of all sizes need to have access to appropriate processing, storage, and distribution systems. And at the dialogues, there was frequent discussion around the loss of regional processing facilities. For example, in the north, that was an issue that was discussed, and also in the south region. And there was also discussion around the challenges for smaller producers to access different retail venues, particularly larger retailers. Another priority was to support and encourage both established farmers and new entrants to all food system industries. And this priority stemmed from a couple of concerns. First, we heard frequently that established farmers are in desperate need of extension services, which means they need help with site-specific production problems. And then also that new farmers are in need of support in terms of learning about production systems and also how to manage a farm production practice. The participants identified that a food system is more than food production, and therefore this priority identifies new entrants to all food system or entrants to all food system industries. So that means that processors, distributors who are wanting to participate in local sustainable food systems also need support, because that can be financially challenging. And then the fourth priority that was identified was its protection and enhancement of provincial agricultural water. And there was discussion about recent changes to the ALR, and certainly concern was expressed by people that agricultural land around the province is under pressure from uses other than food production. Those differ from region to region, but nonetheless there is concern in all the regions that agricultural land should remain for agricultural and food production uses. Now at the dialogue, we had the participants identify actions that they thought could be taken in order to address each of these priority areas. And in the reports that Caitriona and I have put together, both the summary reports from each of the regions and the comprehensive report, all of which are available on the REFBC website, you can find complete lists of that were proposed. For this webinar today, we've just selected a couple of example actions for each of the four, so that you can get a flavor of the kinds of ideas that were proposed. So for increasing knowledge among the public and for policymakers, an example for an education action would be to develop an outreach strategy targeted towards policymakers and other professionals A policy action might be mandatory public school curricula on food systems. There are already a number of programs available and curricula available that teachers can choose, but that's quite different than actually having mandatory public curricula. A research idea might be to identify ways to learn about food systems from traditional Indigenous knowledge.
All guests have been unmuted. All guests have been muted.
Excellent, thank you.
Locations and build permanent farmers market facilities. Research might be piloting models of local shared facilities such as community kitchens. And the point here that was stressed by dialogue participants was that there's frequently a challenge to find an appropriate financial model. And then another would be for large retailers to adjust their practices to allow the incorporation of more local products. Supporting new and established farmers. An education opportunity might be to develop and expand extension services. Policy action might be to develop a toolkit for local governments on how to establish and run a local food policy council. And in terms of research, researching land tenure options that might increase the access to farmland for new entrants. In terms of protecting agricultural land and water, proposed actions included developing an ALR fact sheet that realtors, chambers of commerce, and municipal planning staff could provide to prospective purchasers of ALR land, so they would understand before purchasing property in the ALR what the goals and roles of the ALR land actually are. Policy regulation might be to update bylaws around buffers and setbacks for agricultural land, and in research, researching some of the potential impacts from recent changes to the ALR. Caitriona and I found from the dialogue that a lot of work is going on to address these 4 priority areas, and different actions are being taken in different regions, but at the moment there isn't a lot of sharing between regions. And so one of the opportunities that we see is that would be helpful is if we could create an inventory of the existing actions that are already occurring around the province in different regions.
The meeting is now locked.
Finding a way to make that inventory easily accessible, searchable and accessible to people around the province. And then second, we thought from the dialogues, one of the things we thought might be very useful is to come up with, and this was suggested at the South Region Dialogue, a province-wide vision and definition for sustainable food systems, and that could really to promote province-wide policy and action. So that concludes our presentation or overview of findings from the dialogue. There's a lot more detail about the dialogues in the reports, and I'd encourage you to have a look at those reports. And I'll hand it on to Brent now.
Great, thanks very much, Caitriona and Caitriona. I will just remind you, if you do have any questions during the presentation, if you can just type them in when you remember them, and we'll try to collate them and respond to as many as and after the second presentation. Another thing, if you are on Twitter, send us a tweet at REFBC, and hashtag is BCFood, and it can be a question or it can just be that you're here attending the webinar. And if you can, we've asked people if you can make sure to mute your phones and your mics, just so that we get as good a sound quality.
Oh my God.
One other thing I will mention now is we are recording the webinar, so that if you know people that maybe aren't able to be on this webinar today, they will have an opportunity to listen and see it at a later point in time, and we'll try to send that out to the participants in the days ahead. So let's move on to our second presentation with Brent Mansfield, who is also a working group member of our Sustainable Food Systems Working Group. Brent is director of the BC Food Systems Network, which is a provincial network focusing on developing more healthy, just, and sustainable food systems in urban, rural, and remote communities across BC. Brent's also been, or has served as a member of the Food Policy Council for, 5 years? 6 years. 6 years, and was a co-chair. But I'm going to hand it over to give some analysis and points of view from...
All guests have been unmuted. All guests have been muted.
Good to be with those of you in the room and those on the phone or computer. And it was a real privilege. I was able to attend 3 of the dialogues, which gave me a bit of a perspective of some of what's happening. And I think for me, what's really exciting now is that we actually have a photo webinar of almost 100 people, that we have a next step of priorities to move forward. And now it's really an opportunity that I can situate from the BC Food Systems Network, what opportunities we have to more strategically collaborate. Right? I think this is a great opportunity to move forward from there. So I'm going to put out a couple of ideas and some of the actions that we're up to, and then we'll look forward to having some of the people joining us online also contribute to that conversation. So just quickly, I'll put that up there. David mentioned the BC Food Systems Network in the introduction, but just to say, a provincial network, many of you I'm sure are members and are involved, but kind of really looking at these different areas around connections, nurturing capacity, and looking at joined-up food policy. So really looking at how we can strengthen policy perspectives from health to agriculture and everything in between and across levels of government. So, kind of moving forward, I'm going to speak a little bit first from the perspective of what's next from the working group and expanding that working group, and then some specific actions that the BC Food Systems Network is already involved in and has some resources to move forward, and I think really dovetails nicely with the work of the regional dialogue. So this is a lot of what you've already heard, but I think from here there's really an opportunity to look at, we have a lot of needs mentioned, there's a lot of great work happening in this space, both in research, in practice, in kind of moving towards policy. Let me say my mic maybe, let me move it back a tiny bit there. How do we better align these strategies? How do we, amongst all of the research that's happening, how do we have better alignment? So we know we're not seeing redundancy in research, so we're really seeing the stakeholder engagement build off of each other. So we're seeing opportunities for how all these things come together. And I mean, out of the first priority that Cornelia mentioned, I think there's a lot of opportunity to look at how do we better educate the public, how do we engage with policymakers, both elected officials and staff. And I think there's really an opportunity in where we're at in the food systems arena, in the food movement, to really look at how do we better do those things. And I think there's a lot of opportunities to come together to understand better how we can move these issues further forward in the public and political arenas. And really look at capacity building. What are our needs? Where do people have, and I'll come back to this because I want to know this from you, where are there needs to be able to increase capacity in your own community, whether that's around how to better collaborate across sectors, whether that's around how to better engage with local government or regional government, and how do we work better together. And I think there's really a strong opportunity to continue to do that through the members of the working group working together, and then also the BC Food Systems Network with our project called Good Food Solutions for BC are also excited to play a role in contributing to that as well. So some of the next steps that will happen, the first one being this, the webinar that's happening, but beyond that, I think it's really important that some of the priorities that are named here are shared broadly. And specifically, I think there's some opportunities with strategies that are kind of well underway in development, but as we look towards implementation at a provincial level, there's a healthy eating strategy, as well as an agri-food strategy that I think a lot of aspects of the regional dialogues and these conversations that many of you were involved in contribute nicely to, and I think provide additional context and really an additional regional layer to thinking around how we continue to kind of move forward these diverse agendas in a joined up way across the food system. There's also, I think, some good work identifying some key priorities, but really work that needs to be done drilling deeper with kind of individual stakeholder groups or sectors. And I think of whether that's with local government or agriculture advisory committees, just being one example. And I was actually with David where he presented some of the findings at the Provincial Agriculture Advisory Committee meetings. And being able to do that for the day, thinking about how do we better connect and develop capacity and look at the opportunities that are there to contribute to these same goals, and how do we embed that within these structures that exist? How do we make sure the research and knowledge is there so that that is being implemented consistently on the ground across the province? And there's also, I think, as the working group were exploring possibilities and the role that the BC Food Systems Network will play in this, to look at how we can move this forward together and how we can really look at these kind of collaborative research, education, and policy engagement strategies, and looking to convene a broad symposium, building off of the one that a number of us were involved in coordinating last March, but looking to something in the fall of 2015. And unfortunately, we can't say too much more about that now, but really hoping to kind of drill down into some of the priorities that have been named, to really bring together a lot of the key people working in this space, from researchers to funders to government, civil society, business, and industry, to really look at what do we need to do to move this forward, and to take that down another level and really understand what those opportunities are, and better have collaborative strategies to be able to address these issues. I also would be remiss to not share a little bit of a plug for our annual gathering this summer, which we're excited to be heading up to Prince George. So that's something where many of these same conversations will continue to move forward. And then specifically, I can say, as the BC Food Systems Network and as the director, we're excited to continue to contribute to this process and play our role collaboratively with others. And we will continue to do work and using both the regional dialogues as well as some of the provincial policy processes to really drill down into key priority areas around infrastructure and around supporting new and existing producers and farmers and food processors, et cetera, but also looking at what opportunities there are to support capacity of community groups and local governments. And I think you named as well the important opportunity to really collect an inventory of what is happening and to share those practices across BC. I think we could also be doing a lot better job of that. And so often it's important for each community to go through their own process, but it's also really important to understand the innovative things that are happening elsewhere, whether that's a bylaw or regulation or an innovative model around social enterprise or whatever that might be. I think there's a lot of opportunities for us in British Columbia to better share those pieces. And then I think there's really key opportunities, like I said, to raise the profile of these issues in the public arena, whether that's through media, whether that's through kind of public education campaigns. All of these things are really important. And then also to really be looking at how we can be better framing solutions for policymakers and how we can be working collaboratively with government and alongside governments of all types to really be putting out solutions that we can all work together on. And the BC Food Systems Network is excited to work with all of you and our members to be able to develop some of those materials that we really hope can kind of push forward the future of food policy and practice here in British Columbia. And I want to say this too, and kind of leading into the discussion, and I can see some of the questions are starting to flow in, and this is from my perspective as the director of the BC Food Systems Network, but I'm sure this is also kind of what we're asking through this working group and why we did these dialogues. It really is, how can we better support you in this work across the province, whether that's making connections, whether that's what capacity needs to be built, what capacity are you involved in building, and how do we together work towards a more joined-up food policy at all levels. And that is it for me.
Thanks very much. So we wanted to try to keep these presentations brief so that we would be able to have more interaction with the webinar audience and take some of your questions. Again, I'll just mention the report is available on our website, www.refbc.com. And, you know, one thing I will say about the report, from the real estate Foundation's point of view, you know, we can't fund everything. We can't fund everything that was listed in the report. But what we are doing is taking a closer look and trying to be more strategic with our limited funding that we do have to form collaborations, new alliances with funders, with private industry, with government, with community groups, to see how we can deepen our impact in British Columbia around local and sustainable food systems. So maybe, I guess as moderator, I can start off the questions, and again, feel free to type in any questions you have or tweet them to us at REFBC, #BCFood. Caitriona and Cornelia, what do you think were the biggest surprises that you experienced having attended all of the 6 regional dialogues and hearing from all of these, you know, diverse participants? What surprised you?
I don't think it wasn't as much a surprise, but I really enjoyed learning about what was going on in each region and things that even though we've been visiting a lot of different areas, I didn't know existed until going to the region. And it's the question of connecting all the food actors together because there's a lot of great opportunities happening in one region that could help another region. And I think that was the biggest learning outcome, is that there's some great things already occurring. And it's about getting a conversation and creating those connections so that some initiatives that are happening in the communities may be able to help some initiatives that are happening in materials or Okanagan.
I think one of the other things that perhaps wasn't a surprise but was evident and of interest was just how much time people are volunteering to move this issue forward, and that folks, particularly in local government, in some regions, really are not being resourced in any way to support sustainable local food systems. So that was of interest to me and somewhat surprising, just the limited amount of local resource, local government resource in some regions that is going towards it. So I think that's a real area to pursue.
Great. How about you, Brent?
You know, it was fun attending as an observer, which those of you who know me, I can talk, and it was fun just to listen. And I think for me it was seeing even the unique dynamics of how things were playing out in each region. This was, I think, a reminder for me, maybe not a total surprise, of just the diverse geography and the diverse landscape, both literally and even just in terms of food actors and what that looks like across the province. And I think it's the real importance of understanding that diversity to better understand how we can be aligned provincially.
Okay, great. So we have a question from the webinar relating to priority to. Sorry, can you speak to how the invites to the dialogues were extended? You know, how were people invited or not invited, and you know, how did you do your outreach?
Sure. First and foremost, I want to just state that we understand we didn't capture everyone. We knew the format of the dialogue we really wanted to keep as a dialogue, so that there was a lot of conversation going on. And so we knew that we had to limit it to about 15 to 20 people. So we did outreach. We had local contacts in each region that suggested, mainly focusing on the 8 categories that I presented before, trying to give it a bit of an even a split throughout the participants. And then we emailed, we phoned people. And we also gave the opportunity that if you were unable to make one of the dialogues because of distance, cost, weather was a big thing. We were doing these in November. We also offered an online survey to anyone that couldn't make it. but still wants them to participate. But once again, we understand we didn't capture everyone. There's a lot of people in each region that are doing great work that I'm sure we missed, and we did have quite a tight timeline, and we apologize if we did miss any of you.
Yeah, I would just add also in that the working group got together, that decision around the categories, that was decided by the working group, and together the working group kind of came up with a list of sort of known contacts. The goal was to identify people who are actively engaged within their region. So we weren't looking for sort of a broad general public representation, but looking for specific individuals who are already keyed in and active within the sustainable and local food system arena in their areas. So definitely we did have it's a limited number of people.
Great. Another question from the webinar. How do you deal with larger policy issues, such as hedge funds that are purchasing farmland and using farmland to plant trees for carbon offset? Any ideas?
So that wasn't, that specific example wasn't one that came up, although at a number of the dialogues, people were concerned about really provincial and national level policy. So I think that identifies that kind of range of level that we have to work at, which is the action on the ground locally, but then also those individuals who are interested in working through networks and like the BC Food Systems Network, for example, to lobby or advocate or work with different levels of government to address those kinds of issues. Maybe Brent,
No, and to me that's why I think it is critical. It always has been, but it's critical at this phase. I mean, we were referring to the Global Mail article yesterday, right, around some of these issues, but there's analogous ones elsewhere, right, and some of the things around just protecting and enhancing agricultural land and water, or these broader policy issues. And this is where I think that we need to come together, and we need to be able to raise our voices together and do that in a way that builds the public momentum around these issues. And I think this is the critical intersection between public education and policy change. We really do need to be able to raise awareness of everyone in British Columbia to the importance of these issues and how critical they are to our future and current food security. And I think to be able to do that, I think this is for me really key why we want to convene again in the fall, is really look at, okay, so much great work is happening, and I think by essence it has been kind of a little bit discoordinated, and there's really an opportunity to better align that work. And for me, one of the main reasons why I'm excited to that is because I think we need to have a stronger policy voice. And a lot of these issues around that are kind of being named around lack of support for extension services or lack of regulations, I think this is really, a lot of these do come down to policy issues, and we really do need to be ensuring that we don't just default to strategies that try and embed it in other ways. And we really need to especially at a provincial level, there are key opportunities to be able to see these things more strongly supported.
Great, thank you. Another question that we have is really looking at two areas, health outcomes and gender. And the one around, and that was a comment, but the one around health costs are really skyrocketing, and this is partly due to diet, nutrition, other factors causing everything from obesity to diabetes, and it's costing us collectively in British Columbia a lot of money, a lot of government programs. The other area is gender, and traditionally, I would say women have tended to do shopping, preparing of food, and feeding their families. So I must add that in my family, I do that. Were there any gender lens or an emphasis on health outcomes that you heard about at any of the regional dialogues?
I'll just start off with that. Definitely the issue of health was raised in number of the dialogues we attended, specifically around nutrition and food preparation. And the most common sort of action identified were two. One would be sort of, again, mandatory public school education, but then also support for more community education programs where people can learn about food nutrition, or they can learn about local canning and preserving and other ways to deal with food. So definitely it was an issue we heard quite a bit about. I don't recall specific discussions around gender, but I'll just let Caitriona add if there was anything else.
Yeah, I don't recall specific issues around gender. The health and nutrition, like Cornelia was saying, especially in, like you were saying, in education, having it integrated in at such a young age that everyone knows where a carrot comes from, has the experience of planting a carrot. That was a big emphasis. We did have health authorities within most of the dialogue, so they were able to speak on some of the initiatives in each of the regions, but not specifically gender. I don't know if you remember taking that on.
No, not that I heard. And I think it's important to add that here we're talking about health outcomes and, especially on a joined up perspective, the cost of poverty and food insecurity in this province and what that actually costs us, right? So this is both a food systems issue and a socioeconomic issue, right? And I think we need to understand how those are similar and how those are different and understand those together. And unfortunately, when we have what tends to be often such a siloed system, those costs are not accounted for, right? Because our agricultural system is looking out for our agricultural system, not our health. And oftentimes, health is not able to maybe understand or influence in a way that would make sense from a health perspective and through budgets, income security and social policy, right? And I think this is where we really need to be able to bridge those divides, because these are not separate issues, right? Agricultural issues and social policy issues and health issues are different sides of the same coin, right? And how do we connect those to the power of food as an economic driver and to create good jobs and all of these different elements, right? So I think it's really critical in this conversation, and maybe it wasn't as strong in terms of the focus of this, but the connections between the sustainable food systems issues and food insecurity and poverty reduction, right? Because we do need to hold those things together, and I think that's a really important thing to do in a joined up perspective.
Okay, great, interesting. We have another question really looking at agricultural land and Site C. And on April 8th, the province signed an order in Council number 148, which removes all land within the proposed Site C reservoir area. And this question asks, this includes class 1 to 6 land, some of the best food-producing land in BC, and it would be the largest removal of ALR in the history of BC. So what does this group suggest should be done to prevent the removal of crucial food-producing land in the province?
I'll just take, this is not necessarily my suggestion, but it was a suggestion from one of the dialogues from actually a former regional agrologist for the province, and I think it's a very interesting one to consider, which is just strictly an outright ban on removals from the ALR. Once you determine that no land is removed for any purpose, it changes everything about the way policy and production happens in relation to that land, the way that people think about that land and cost for it. So that might be, that might not be the kind of policy that would be seeing soon, but I think it's a really interesting one to consider, even if it seems somewhat out there.
And I think we need to build the demand, build the momentum, build the movement for this, right? And I mean, I think it's easy to become jaded on this and say that Site C is going forward whether we push back or not. But I think kind of taking a long-term perspective on this, that the importance of, as individuals and as organizations and of alliances, taking strong stands on these issues and on the protection of agricultural land, and really making sure those in all of our communities likewise understand the value of this, likewise understand the critical protection of agricultural land and water, right? And I think maybe that hasn't been done as well as we could have done around Site C, and really just to understand how much food producing land and some of the best food producing land in the province is being affected by this and the scope of the issue. And I think we also can and need to do better at connecting food to other issues, right? And I think around kind of energy and around water and around broader land use, that is also those issues are actively being raised from those communities. How do we better tie the food narrative and the food policy issues and agricultural land use issues into those, so that together we are, as citizens, making that ask of our government.
Interesting. Another question, which I'm glad has been asked, is around the role of municipal government. And I think, at least in the regional dialogues that I went to, that was a consistent topic of discussion that came up. So specifically, what is the role of municipal government, whether that's cities or parks or school boards, to help drive food policy and help to enable more food production in our communities?
Just to make one comment, there's one thing that Cornelia pointed out earlier is how many people are giving up their own time to related to these initiatives. And one thing that we learned is a lot of the local municipal planners are doing a lot of their food policy work off the side of their desk.
Mm-hmm.
One thing would be great is to get it more integrated into the municipal governments, having planners that are, or other employees that are trained in food systems and have that at the forefront of their agenda. Mm-hmm. So it isn't off the side of their desk work. Just having it integrated into a lot of the OCPs, having more food policy councils, which we're seeing a lot more of throughout the region, and having that kind of builds momentum from the municipal government standpoint.
Mm-hmm. And I think I would add to, there's a real opportunity, whatever level of government we're talking about, whether we're talking about provincial or local governments, regional governments, any elected body, and whether that's through Parks and Rec, whether that's through schools, what tools and levers does that government structure have in relation to the food system, right? So sometimes that might be public procurement, or sometimes they might have very little public procurement. Sometimes that might be around land use. Sometimes that might be around kind of education and programming. And there's so many different ways to do it. And this is where to me, it's about that food systems lens, bringing that more to government, and kind of embedding that food systems thinking to understand the connections between what a public institution does and how that affects the food system, but also flipping the other way around. What does food bring to a city? What does food bring to a school board? And taking it that way in a way that's much more solutions-oriented. So it's not just, here's something we have to address, but food is such both a powerful end that we need to protect our agricultural land, we need to increase food production, all these things, but it's a powerful means to increase community connectedness, environmental goals, health goals, et cetera, We all know this, right? But I think it's really important to understand it both that way, and really we have treated food and agriculture issues as kind of no one's business. No one has really owned this in a comprehensive, joined-up way, and we really need to move it towards this is now everyone's business. So it's not just we need a provincial government across ministries that's fully on board. We need that at all levels. We need it at every single level of municipality, of regional district, really asking what can we do and how can we benefit from taking a more integrated approach.
Yeah, you mentioned food policy councils, Caitriona, and I'm wondering if you see, or what role you see for food policy councils to help with this integration that you just mentioned, Brent, in working with local governments to get towards this integration better than we've been doing it in the past. Do you have any ideas or maybe examples that have worked previously?
I think as past chair of Vancouver Food Policy.
I can respond to that too, and also, despite not going to the treatments in the north with the regional dialogues, I actually had the privilege in the last 2 weeks to visit both Nelson and Prince George, and these were some of the conversations. So to me, we do have great examples, not just Vancouver, of a number of food policy councils in the province, but to me, we need to ask kind of the ends and means question again, right? So for me, it's not about, making the end goal of the creation of a food policy council. What does that serve, right? And to me, it's about that collaborative mechanisms, right? So how do we actually make sure we have multi-sectoral spaces, both inside and outside of government, that are coming together to address these issues, right? And sometimes that makes sense for it to be a food policy council, right? I think it's really important for that to be connected, and I would say generally the stronger the better to local government to really be able to take advantage of both community, business, and government strengths, but also to do that in a way that's authentic to where a community is at, right? And really it is about mechanisms to support collaboration and to bring diverse perspectives together, because we all know the food system is so complex, it is so many of these different things. To really harvest the potential of that, we need to have these spaces, right? And a lot of times, I had some great conversations with folks involved across the north. There's actually already tables that exist like this around, whether that's around health or agriculture. How do you bring more of a food systems lens to those? I don't know that any of you that may have committee burnout. Anybody? No, I don't think so. There are so many committees. Maybe the answer is not always creating a food policy council. It might be. But it actually might be to better embed and recognize a food systems lens in these existing initiatives.
And then another question, would a provincial food policy council be of value to assist local communities in gaining traction for, growing local food systems and sharing and exchanging knowledge?
I think that's a useful idea and concept, and again, it would really depend on the execution of it, how it functions, kind of resources it has. So I think the idea is good, but it would really depend how it's set up and what it's able to do.
Yep, and you won't be surprised to learn that I'm a believer that if we could get towards a functioning group like that really was multi-sectoral, that really was solutions oriented, I think we could see an approach like that really be powerful, and I think the opportunity to bring diverse perspectives, but also diverse ministries together, right? Because oftentimes so many of these issues are across ministries, and more being involved in kind of provincial food policy discussions is kind of the classic, and you get this at all levels, where it's not our responsibility. Well, this is what we do, but that's not ours, right? And really we can all do that. That's not our responsibility, that's not our responsibility, and we get absolutely nothing done, right? So if we are able to bring together opportunities like that and actually have a food policy council where people want to be there addressing solutions, I know provincially oftentimes it's hard to have mechanisms, even at a provincial level, to be able to, so this is a strong word, but ensure collaboration. I mean, there are examples of the Climate Action Secretariat, where the Secretariat is actually a mechanism where people have to come together to resolve issues at a kind of a ministry level, right? But I think we would need something to ensure that people are coming together, that there's actually the political will, the actual trust and collaborative support to actually make things happen, right? Because really it is about trust and collaboration and kind of better understanding how to strategically align things. And that's hard when there's power dynamics, so there's unclear roles and responsibilities.
So we've only got a couple minutes left. This question may be more of a comment, but how do we go from studies to action when most studies are funded and most of the action is left to volunteers? And the comment is we've done enough studies and now is the time for action. So I'll follow that up with a question. We've been running community-based extension services for several years and found that funding models for this type of work are few and far between. So how do we move from planning and coordination strategies to more frontline implementation programs?
Well, I think that raises, there's a challenge there, and I would just suggest that I would just say that there are certain things that need to have secured funding, and something like extension services, there really just needs to be, that would have to come from a provincial ministry, or at least some portion of secured regular funding. Is the only way we're going to get those types of services ongoing. There are models of that elsewhere. Just have to have you need the commitment and interest and will to have funding that's specific there. I would say in terms of research, we could separate out, there's certain kind of actions we already know we want to take to get going. And then there's other type of research that actually needs to keep going in the background. And maybe what's happening is we haven't separated well enough yet. Both Caitriona and I are involved in research on agriculture and food systems, and we can say that there's an absolute dearth or lack of really good information and knowledge about agriculture in British Columbia at site-specific levels and also sort of food systems. Looks like we might have a little problem there. So this is,
we are at 1 o'clock now, and I do have a couple more questions. So if you need to leave us now, go ahead and you can depart. But if you're willing to stay for a couple more minutes, maybe we could have a couple more questions, and then we'll finish this off if that's okay. One question: is there funding available to develop policies, such as food marketing, infrastructure, etc., where there would be a lead person for each region that could, help coordinate some of this? Do you know of anything?
I'm not aware of what's available, but it seems like that's the kind of thing that ought to be funded through ministry who does for development of small business development and so on. So I would think it might be grant available, but I don't know. But it's a really good idea to look for funding for that kind of thing.
And this is what I'll add to sitting beside you. Yes, this is the real estate foundations that we're sitting in, but also wrestling with at what point is the right response to look at how do we find private funding, philanthropic funding to be able to do these things, and at what point do we need to have coordination and strategy to actually affect policy for things that I actually believe should be publicly cared for, and how that's done, if that's partnering with local communities, yes. But to me, this is where I think the role of understanding how we have clear policy asks and how we move these things forward, and influence budgets. Right? I think we will all acknowledge the current political support for and public funding for agriculture and food systems in this province is nowhere near what it needs to be. Right? So to me, that has to be part of the solution. Right? So if I'm looking at a strategy 20 years out, it's not to have privately funded extension services. I actually believe we need to raise the profile and help people understand the benefit, including policymakers, of why this is a public policy issue. Right? So I think we need to wrestle with those tensions, and that looks different across a lot of different areas. And yes, I believe there will be funding for community level initiatives, and there will be these things. And I would say oftentimes the best public policy is done, and funding for programs is done in partnership with communities, and it's still making use of other organizations, yes, but what is our long-term strategy around how we get there?
I would just say, so it puts the question towards whether there's leadership from different levels, ministries of the provincial government. So there's an opportunity for a provincial government to take a real leadership role here, and not necessarily just through funding, but in the ways that Brent just identified.
Okay. Maybe the final question that we'll leave you with is a good one. For those who weren't able to participate in the dialogue, how can we be involved in moving forward? That's the question. How can people get involved in this movement, so to speak, around working on sustainable food systems in BC?
Well, I would say one of the hopes that we have after doing the dialogues and working with Brent and with our working group is that moving forward from here, we find a mechanism and a place that's sort of galvanized in place and space, and it might be the BC Food Systems Network. It might be, it's not very clear where that is yet, but where folks can come together and kind of join in at whatever capacity they have or wish they have. And maybe I'll let you speak a bit more.
Sure.
Brent.
Can I just say something? Also, on the REF website, there are summaries from each region. So within those summaries, if you haven't had a chance to take a look at them, we have an overview of what's discussed at the dialogue, as well as some of the organizations that participated. So by that, you might be able to connect with someone in your region that has presented some of these actions or priorities and have a discussion with them as well.
Yeah. Which, so I think that was my first comment is figure out where you can, if you're not already present in these spaces where this is happening in your own community, because I think that is that much more practical. I think we do need to kind of build that momentum at the community level. Not surprisingly, I'm also going to encourage you to connect with the BC Food Systems Network, whether that's through our listserv or our gathering or become a member, etc. And also from this, kind of building off of some of these, some of the priorities that were identified, some of the work that the BC Food Systems Network will be doing shortly through Good Food Solutions for BC is actually reaching out and kind of doing some further, like we were kind of saying, scanning of innovative practice, but also kind of further refining and prioritizing. So kind of be on the lookout for that, and we will plan to kind of send that out through similar avenues. So hopefully you can continue to plug in that way.
Great. I'm sure we could continue talking for the next couple hours, but we want to respect your time and just thank you again for spending the last hour with us. I think there seems to be a real, if I can say it, hunger for this type of event and exchange and discussion, a real thirst for this knowledge. And, you know, we filled out this webinar, you know, in a matter of days. So we might want to be thinking about here at the Real Estate Foundation how we can help continue this exchange of information and how to convene, you know, other types of exchanges to move forward in the local and sustainable food system. I'd personally like to thank our panel today of Caitriona, Feeney, and Cornelia Sussmann from KPU, and Brent Mansfield from BC Food Systems Network. It's been great working with you over the last many months on this, and I hope we can continue to, you know, take baby steps forward in this huge and complex issue, but very exciting space to be right now in BC. So thank you.
Baby steps and good steps. Thank you.
All right. And for everybody else, again, if you have more questions, you can leave them here, or you can always email us and be in touch. But I just want to thank you again for your time, and we'll see you soon.